All the Young Dudes, Sirius's Perspective by Rollercosterwords. Chapter 25, Second Year, After Hours. Friday the 6th of September, 1972. Now that Remus was talking to them again, they were finally able to ask him all the questions that James had insisted they hold on to. That evening, after dinner, all four boys sat on Remus's bed. When did it happen? Does Dumbledore know? Have you ever, attacked anyone? What's it like? Where do you go when it happens? Remus hugged his legs to his chest, looking a bit overwhelmed by their curiosity. But he didn't push them away or snap at them, which Sirius took as a good sign. Instead, he mumbled, and appeared to be processing the flood of questions they'd hurled at him. I was 5 years old when it happened. I don't really remember much before that. Yeah, Dumbledore knows. I don't think I've ever hurt anyone. I think I'd probably know if I did. So when you turn, can you remember what it's like? Sirius leaned forward, the curiosity eating him alive. Being a wolf? Not really. Remus furrowed his brow, lip poking out as he thought. Maybe I can remember feeling stuff, but I don't think I have a human brain while I'm like that. It's more like a really bad dream. Sirius's mind was spinning. He wished he could know what it was like to turn into a wolf. He bet it was really cool. I always thought werewolves were more... Pete studied Remus. I don't know. Scary? A predictably stupid question from Pete. Remus just shrugged. Sirius spoke up again, asking the next thing that popped into his head. So is that what happened to your dad? Did he get killed by the werewolf that bit you? Remus flinched a bit on the word werewolf. Sirius realized that none of them had actually said it out loud yet. No, my dad, he killed himself. He said it without any discernible emotion, voice flat, after I was bitten, so I suppose it was because of me. My mother, she's a muggle. I think it was probably a bit much for her, so she panicked and sent me off to St. Edmund's. No one seemed to know how to respond to that. Sorry to hear your dad offed himself. My condolences. It had happened a long time ago, and Remus didn't seem particularly upset about it. So Sirius figured he wasn't looking for a pity party. Another question popped into his head. Have you ever met... He started to speak, but James cut him off with a sharp look. That's enough, Black. Leave him alone. Sirius wanted to point out that they'd been leaving him alone all bloody week, but Remus was looking at James gratefully. He didn't seem too keen to remain the centre of attention. Sirius sighed and dropped it. There would be plenty of times for questions later. With nothing else to do, they split off to start their homework. Sirius kept darting glances at Remus, trying to imagine what he looked like as a wolf. Did werewolves look the same as regular wolves? They'd have to look it up, or ask Remus. But he supposed his friend might not exactly have access to a mirror during his transformation. Eventually, James stood up and stretched, announcing to the room that he was going for a run before it got dark. With Quidditch trials coming up, he was becoming more and more obsessive about fitness. He pestered Peter and Sirius to join him, but they begged off. Bloody slave driver, Peter muttered as the door shut behind him. Told him I'm not even trying out. I think I probably will, Sirius said, nonchalant. They need a beater, anyway. He kept his voice casual, but all of the training with James had rubbed off on him. He desperately wanted to make the team. For the past few weeks, he'd been fantasizing about walking onto the Quidditch pitch, red robes billowing, crowd cheering, broom gripped in his fist. After 15 minutes of work, Sirius managed to convince the other two boys to abandon their academic pursuits in favor of a game of exploding snap, which became rowdy quite quickly. They put a record on in the background. Peter begged for anything but Bowie, and though Sirius shook his head in disgust, he benevolently agreed to settle for the Beatles. Later, after lights out, Sirius crept over to James's bed. There was a wand light emanating from behind Remus's curtains, so Sirius cast a silencing spell over them. As he settled onto the blankets, James gave him a stern look. What was that, earlier? With Remus. You've got to be more careful about what you say sometimes, Black, honestly. Sirius blinked. What did I say? He was just talking about his dead dad, James whispered exasperately. You can't just keep pestering him. He was upset. Sirius frowned, thinking back to the conversation. Remus had looked a little uncomfortable, but that was just because he didn't like attention, right? He was fine. It's not like it happened recently. Besides, he didn't look sad about it. James rolled his eyes. You can be really bloody dense sometimes. Just because someone's hiding it doesn't mean they're not upset. It was his dad, for Merlin's sake. Sirius pondered this. He had never been very good at hiding his emotions, so he usually didn't bother trying. If someone else upset you, why not just let them know about it? But he supposed that Remus was a very private person, with a tendency to keep secrets. Had Sirius's questioning really bothered him? Nah, he shrugged after a moment. Lupin's fine. James rolled his eyes again, giving up and switching topics to talk about the upcoming Quidditch trials. When Sirius lifted the silencing spell and slipped back from behind the curtains, there was still a light glowing from Remus's bed. He paused for a moment, considering what James had said. Remus looked up, surprised, when Sirius pulled the curtains back, open a crack. He was sitting up, reading one of Uncle Alfred's Muggle books. He liked to borrow them. Sirius grinned. Hiya. Hi, Remus whispered back, slowly shutting his book. What's up? Saw your light. Can I come in? Okay. He slipped inside quickly and knelt on the bed, getting comfortable. Remus watched with a wary look, pulling his legs up to his chest and putting his book aside. Sonora Quisus, Sirius whispered, casting the same soundproofing charm that he had often used with James. He glanced down at the paperback resting on the pillow next to Remus. It had a picture of a desolate, craggy landscape on the cover, and a funny-looking metal contraption. How's the book? Good, Remus replied, non-committally, before repeating, What's up? I was just talking to James, Sirius shifted, settling cross-legged on the covers. He reckons I've upset you, asking questions about your dad. Oh, Remus blinked and cocked his head, confused. No, I'm okay. It doesn't upset me, I'm used to it. That's what I told James, Sirius whispered, vindicated. He knew Remus was fine. James was just too sensitive. Right. They both fell silent for a moment. Sirius used the time to study his friend. He was only wearing a thin vest, leaving his arms and shoulders bare. His skin was a patchwork of red and silver scars, some long-healed and some fresh. There was no pattern, no rhyme or reason. They danced like lightning across his skin. Snape had acted like they were repulsive, but that wasn't true. Sirius thought they were sort of beautiful, harsh and unforgiving, but beautiful all the same, like a jagged landscape on the cover of Uncle Alfred's book. How did you get your scars? He asked, admiring them. But Remus drew back, pulling the bedsheets up to cover himself. How'd you get yours? He snapped. Sirius recoiled, caught off guard. Remus's voice was cold and sharp. Had he offended him? Sirius didn't want to talk about his scars, about his family, but he supposed it wasn't fair to ask Remus to trust him when he wasn't willing to return the favour. From my parents. He kept his voice even and controlled. The Lacero curse. It's how they discipline us. The word left a bitter taste in the back of his throat. Remus's face softened. Sorry, he whispered, dropping the duvet. He extended his arms, inviting Sirius to look again. I do them to myself. When I change, see? He twisted slightly, pulling down the shoulder of his vest. 4 long white claw marks ran through the skin there. Wow, Sirius breathed, kneeling again so he could lean forwards, studying them. Why do you do it? I don't know. I'm not exactly myself. Madame Pomfrey reckons it's frustration, because it's in the nature to attack people, and I don't have anyone to attack. Where do they put you? There's an old house. McGonagall and Pomfrey take me there every month. There's a passageway under the Whomping Willow. Does McGonagall watch you? No, it's too dangerous. I think they use spells to keep me locked in. Sirius tried to imagine his friend, locked inside an abandoned house, clawing at his own skin. Sounds horrible. Remus shrugged. Nah, it's not as bad as at St. Eddie's. They have a cell for me there, with a silver door. When I first got there, Matron thinks I was too little to remember, but they put me in a cage. Sirius jerked back in shock. That's disgusting! Remus frowned, surprised. I don't know, he said neutrally. It was to keep everyone else safe. And I can only have been the size of a puppy. Cub, Sirius corrected. Huh? A baby wolf is a cub. Dogs are puppies. Oh, so where did you get bitten then? Sirius leaned forward again, curious. Oh, ear. Remus patted his left side, just above his hip. Sirius watched him, waiting. After a moment, he gave a resigned sigh and asked, Do you want to see? Sirius nodded eagerly, holding up his lip wand to see better as Remus lifted the hem of his shirt. There, dimpling the pale skin, was a huge scar. It was different than the others, bigger, each tooth clearly marked. It had grown with Remus, stretched and distorted a little bit. Sirius leaned even closer, trying to imagine the huge jaws closing down. Oh, wow, he breathed. He had the strong urge to reach out and trace his fingers over the teeth, but Remus pushed him away suddenly, saying, God, Black, you're so weird. Sirius just grinned, knee bumping into his friend's leg. Friday the 13th of October, 1972. So what exactly are we doing here? James asked, bemused. And why do we have to bring a stupid cloak? Sirius grumbled. It's hours until curfew. I'm hot, Peter complained. Oh, shut up, all of you, Remus said sternly. I'm trying to concentrate. Concentrate on what? Ouch! Sirius yelped as Remus kicked him in the shin. I said, shut up. Bloody okay, he muttered sulkily before falling silent. Remus had dragged them all out under James's invisibility cloak, insisting that he had a mission for them, but so far the mission had only involved shuffling slowly through the halls, and now they were here, standing in front of a grotesque statue of a hunchbacked witch in the middle of an empty corridor. To make matters worse, Remus kept sniffing every few seconds, and it was getting on Sirius's nerves. Have you brought us here to meet your new girlfriend, Lupin? James teased. Remus was staring intently at the one-eyed witch. Why do you keep sniffing like that? Sirius asked, petulant. I don't want to be this close to you if you're going to get a cold. Can't any of you smell that? Smell what? Chocolate. Definitely chocolate. Chocolate? Where? Peter perked up, glancing around. I can't smell anything, Sirius said, losing patience. Me neither, James said. It's coming from the statue, Remus mumbled, only half listening to them. He reached out, touching the stone through the cloak. What? Sirius asked, irritated. Reckon the old bint's hump is packed with sweets or something? He was quickly growing bored. When Remus said he had a mission, Sirius had expected something exciting. No, Remus snapped. I reckon it's one of those secret passageways from that book of yours. Sirius perked up. Really? He looked down at the statue again. Can you actually smell chocolate? Is that some special thing you can do? Yeah. So bloody cool. Sirius wished that he had his super sense. He wondered what else Remus could do. It doesn't lead to the kitchens, Peter mused. They're on the ground floor. Hufflepuff told me. How do we get in? Password? James suggested. Like the common room. Scallywag! Peter shouted immediately, overeager. Nothing happened. Remus and Sirius burst into laughter. I didn't mean the exact same password, Peter, James said kindly, but he was chuckling a bit too. What about Alohomora? Sirius suggested, once he could breathe again. Remus tried it, but nothing happened. That's for locks, anyway, James pointed out. Isn't it something else for revealing unseen entryways? Oh, yeah, Sirius nodded, excitedly. Yeah, there's, Descendrium! He tapped his wand to the witch's hump. It slid open immediately, leaving a gap big enough for them to file through, one at a time. A secret tunnel. Sirius's heart leapt in his chest. They slipped inside immediately, and the hump closed behind them. Lumos! They chanted in unison, finally heaving off the cloak. James folded it up and tucked it under his arms, striding out to go ahead. Come on, then, he urged, holding out his wand in front of them to light up the dark passageway. Let's go. They followed after him eagerly. It was a long walk, down a flight of cold stone stairs, through a tunnel that was earthy and damp. Sirius wondered who had dug it, and when, and why. His mind spun with all the possibilities of their discovery. When they finally reached the end, there was another staircase. This one led up to a wooden trap door. After exchanging glances, it was silently agreed that James would go first. They watched him push open the door and poke his head through, holding their breath. I don't believe it, he laughed, voice slightly muffled. You have to see. He hauled himself the rest of the way through the door, disappearing above. Sirius hurried up after him, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He heard Remus climbing up behind them. Where are we? Sirius asked, studying the dark room as Peter hesitantly poked his head through the opening in the floor. Everywhere he turned, he was confronted with stacks of boxes and crates. It was clear what Remus had been talking about. Now the entire room smelled overwhelmingly of chocolate and sweets. I think we're actually in Hogsmeade, James whispered excitedly. This is the storeroom at Honeyduke's. The sweet shop? Remus asked, but no one bothered to answer, as Sirius had just ripped open a box to reveal what appeared to be 100 chocolate frogs. Remus was the only one of them who hadn't actually been to Hogsmeade, one of the only entirely magical villages in Britain. All of the others had been on family holidays and were quite familiar with Honeyduke's merchandise. Sirius was absolutely thrilled as he opened another box, this one containing boxes of Beetree Bott's every flavour beans. It took some time to coax Peter all the way up, but once they had pulled him through the trap door, the boys spent the next hour exploring the shop. Remus took charge of the mission, directing them on how much they could skim without being noticed. Apparently, this was not his first experience with a bit of shoplifting. Sirius felt like a real marauder, sneaking through the shop with his friends. The marauders returned to the Gryffindor common room with their bounty, pockets heavy and faces aching with grins. One of the prefects took points from them for missing curfew, but not even Peter would be bothered to care. They ate until their stomachs hurt, and as they all lay in bed later that night, Sirius called out, "That's definitely going on the map." Chapter 26. Second Year, Quidditch. Sirius was going to kill James Potter. It's all his fault, he thought to himself, seething as he climbed behind the tapestry. If it weren't for James, he would never have been in this mess, would never have had to suffer the indignity that he had just been made to suffer. If it weren't for James Potter and his stupid happy confidence, and his persistent cajoling, and his enthusiastic assurance that everything would always turn out exactly as planned, then Sirius would never, ever have gotten in this position. He curled up, alone, angry tears pricking at his eyes. It had all started that morning when James had dragged him out of bed an hour before the Quidditch trials to go down for practice. They'd woken Remus and Peter, too, harassing the boys until they were all trudging together down to the Quidditch pitch. So Sirius was already tired by the time he was pulling on his flying kit, never mind the nervous adrenaline racing through his veins. James had made him waste all his best flying energy on that ridiculous, unnecessary last-minute practice, and James kept whispering about how much fun it would be when they were both on the team, putting all this pressure on Sirius, like he'd be a failure if he didn't make it. Sirius was jittery with nerves by the time they actually headed out to the pitch for trials. The chasers were up first, and James was top form. He swooped through the air like he'd been born to fly, executing precise turns and sharp dives that nobody else could pull off, zipping about like he was untouchable. It was clear within the first minute that he was leagues ahead of the other hopefuls trying out. When they finally landed, Flushed and grinning, he shot Sirius a broad, self-satisfied smile, like they both already knew who'd make the team. There were only 3 students trying out for the position of beta. A blurry 5th year, Sirius and Marlene McKinnon. Marlene was best friends with Mary. Sirius knew because Mary mentioned her all the time in potions, and because the two were pretty much inseparable, going everywhere together. But where Mary was brash and talkative, Marlene was much more withdrawn. In fact, Sirius wasn't sure that he'd ever actually heard her speak. It seemed as if the only sound she made was when she was giggling with Mary. So Sirius wasn't too worried about Marlene in terms of competition. She was so quiet and shy, he couldn't imagine her brutally smacking around bludgers. In fact, she looked like she might cry if one of them came near her. The 5th year was much more concerning. He had at least 6 inches on both of them, and his arms were thick and corded with muscle under the sleeves of his Quidditch robes. Beaters needed to be big and powerful enough to knock away the nasty bludgers, and at first glance the older students certainly seemed to fit the bill more than Sirius or Marlene. However, once Madame Hooch blew her whistle and sent them soaring into the sky, it quickly became clear that there was no need to be concerned about the older student. While he certainly had the build for a beta, he lacked the precision necessary for Quidditch while flying. He couldn't dodge quickly enough, and he swung his bat wildly, failing to hit anything except his own leg. Marlene McKinnon was a whole different story. She was like a machine, brutally smacking away any bludger that strayed near her. Not only that, but her willowy frame lent itself to speed. She could dodge around easily, an important skill for a beta. Sirius felt his face heating in embarrassment as she flew circles around him. It wasn't that he was doing badly. He was almost doing as good as James when it came to speed, though he lacked quite the same amount of precision. He managed to smack a few bludgers away, doing altogether better than the struggling 5th year. But Marlene was a monster. It wasn't even a competition with her in the trials. When Sirius landed his broom, he already knew what the outcome would be. He crossed his arms, ignoring his friends' nervous smiles as they gathered to hear the results of the trials. It wasn't as if James had anything to be worried about. Sirius thought to himself bitterly. Sure enough, the captain, a lanky 6th year, named Ranveer Singh, called out, "Potter! Chaser!" almost immediately. James broke into a grin, and some of the students around him patted on the back and murmured congratulations. Sirius kept his arms folded stubbornly. "And for beaters," Singh continued. For a moment, despite himself, Sirius hoped desperately that he would hear his own name, but then, "McKinnon!" There it was. Sirius had never been so embarrassed in his whole life. He couldn't believe that he'd spent all summer practicing, just to be beaten by a girl. He was a black, he was a marauder, he wasn't supposed to be the second best. As the students began to disperse, Marlene and James hung back at Singh's request, so that he could give them their practice schedules. Sirius was about to leave when he called out, "Oi, Black! Hang back a minute too." Sirius waited, growing more and more irritated as he listened to the Gryffindor captain congratulating the other 2 second years, explaining the practice schedule and talking about getting them fitted for their uniforms. James was practically glowing with excitement, which just made Sirius glower even more. By the time Singh turned to him, he was ready to storm off the field. "Did great out there," the 6th year smiled encouragingly, placing a hand on Sirius's shoulder. He stifled the urge to shrug it off. "We could use a beta for our reverse team. What do you say?" James's eyes went wide, and he smiled eagerly. Sirius gritted his teeth. "No thanks." "Are you sure? It would be great to have you at practices, especially because Adriel is—" "I said no, okay?" Sirius snapped. Singh frowned at him, holding up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "All right, mate." Sirius was fuming as he trailed Marlene and James back to the stands. Their friends were waiting, which just embarrassed him more. Everyone had seen him screw it up. He'd been completely humiliated. "I got in!" Marlene said eagerly. Evans, the annoying muggle-born girl, was waiting for her, and the two squealed and hugged. Sirius wanted to throttle them both. Peter and Remus were both standing awkwardly next to Lily, eyes darting between James and Sirius like they weren't sure what to do. Sirius snorted. "Yeah, well done, McKinnon," he said bitterly, looking at the ground. "Thanks. You were really good too, Sirius," she said awkwardly. He grunted in response. Marlene clearly didn't believe it. She thought he was rubbish, with her stupid smug smile. James shot him a look, but Sirius couldn't be bothered. He was mad at James, too. He was the only one who convinced Sirius to try out. And look what happened. His traitorous friend reached out and shook Marlene's hand. "See you next week for practice." "Yeah, great," she smiled at him brightly. "See you, Potter." The two girls set off back to the castle, arm in arm, chattering incessantly. "Sirius, mate, it's not the end of the world," James said patronizingly, turning back around. "I know." Sirius kicked a tuft of grass. "You could have been there on the reverse team if you wanted. Singh did offer." "I know. I don't want to be on the bench." There was a short silence, and then James sighed. "Should we go for breakfast?" The question was directed at the other two boys. Peter nodded. Psychophantically? Peter nodded sycophantically. But before they could start walking, Remus caught Sirius's eye. "Well done, James," he said pointedly. "You were amazing. Congratulations." Sirius flushed, ashamed. What? So James had done amazing and deserved to make it on the team, but Sirius didn't? Is that what Remus was saying? James had done well, but Sirius had just embarrassed himself. "Cheers, Lupin." James grinned. "Traitor." "Yeah," Peter said, punching him on the arm. "Nice one, Potter." "Thanks." Sirius walked a few steps ahead of his friends, on their way back to the castle, not in the mood for all the jolly congratulating. But James just jogged to keep up with him. "You can try out again next year. Arador would have left by then. He told me he was dropping out to focus on his newts." "I don't care. It's fine," Sirius muttered, wanting to be left alone. He sped up, lugging his broom, leaving his friends behind. This time, James didn't try to catch up. Sirius skipped breakfast, not in the mood to hear everyone fawn over James for his new position on the team. In fact, he didn't want to see his friend at all. The resentment bubbling in his chest had hardened into a solid mass of fury, and Sirius thought that if he was to see James's self-satisfied smile one more time, he might just punch his friend in the face. So he left the Gryffindor Tower, making his way to one of the spots they'd found while adding to the map. It was a small alcove, tucked behind the tapestry of a unicorn. There was just enough space to curl up, and it made an excellent hiding place when he needed to get away from Filch. Now the tapestry fell into place behind him. Sirius tucked his knees into his chest, grateful for the darkness. He didn't want to cry, but his body didn't give him much of a choice. His tears were hot pinpricks in his eyes, and he scrubbed at his cheeks as they fell. His nose had started running, and his breathing was going funny, so he cast a silencing spell to let himself succumb to the emotion spilling out of him. He couldn't explain why he was so upset. James was right, it wasn't the end of the world, and he could try out again next year, and it was just Quidditch. But Sirius felt as though he kept getting his hopes up for the future, only to be let down. Playing Quidditch for Gryffindor would have shown that he really belonged here, and he didn't need Slytherin or his parents or Reg. But he didn't even manage to hit the stupid bludger right. He kept screwing it up. He felt like everything was out of his control, and there was nothing he could do about any of it. He had mostly cried himself out by the time Remus found him. But he was still embarrassed to be caught when his face was so obviously tear-stained. Sirius scowled and turned away, curling into a ball in his little alcove. "Go away, Lupin," he sulked. "Can't cheer me up, okay?" But Remus just rolled his eyes and clambered in with him, forcing himself to scoot over. "Budge up," he said firmly. "I'm not here to cheer you up, you prat." What? What are you singing and moping for? Your best mate just had all of his dreams come true at once. Go and be a good sport. He couldn't believe it. First, Remus rubbed it in that James was making the team earlier, and now he was here to try and force Sirius to get over it, to pretend that everything was all right. You wouldn't understand, he muttered indignantly, anger flaring back up in his chest. No, I suppose not, Remus agreed neutrally. But I do understand that James really wanted to be a chaser, and he worked really hard for it, and he got it. Marlene really wanted to be a beater, and she worked really hard too, Evans told us. So she got it. She was just better than you. Piss off, Sirius hissed, shoving him away, but Remus continued, undeterred. You didn't even care that much, he shoved Sirius back. Not as much as Potter. And you only did the trial because he was doing it. You don't always have to do the same things. You still beat him in Transfiguration. You still get the best marks in the year. Everyone likes you. Well, except the Slytherins and maybe your family, but who cares? Peter's family don't like him either. Sirius laughed weakly despite himself. Remus made everything seem so simple. It helped Sirius to feel a bit more grounded. So stop acting like a little kid and go and say well done. Fine. Good. They hopped down from the ledge together, letting the tapestry fall back into place. The silver-threaded unicorn used the disturbance to escape, leaving the tiny embroidered knights to shake their fists angrily at the boys. Sirius shoved his hands into his pockets, feeling a bit embarrassed about how he'd acted. Now that he'd had a good cry, he was feeling much better. It really wasn't all that bad, not making the team. Did you all have breakfast? He asked when they walked back to the common room. Yep, Remus said. James saved you some toast, though. Sirius smiled. He's a good mate. Yeah, Remus snapped. He is. They were both quiet after that, walking side by side. Just before they reached the portrait of the fat lady, Sirius caught Remus's eye, pausing. I don't try to copy James. He didn't want Remus to think that he was like Peter, just following along with whatever his friend did. Didn't say you did, Remus said. You compete, though. Sirius didn't deny that. He looked up again, speaking in a low voice. And I don't care what my family thinks, he said fiercely, determined that his friend would understand. Sirius didn't want his family to ever hold the sort of power over him that they had over Reg. I know, mate, Remus said gently. I know that. Chapter 27. Second year. A birthday engagement. Friday the 3rd of November, 1972. Of course, James Potter forgave easily, and when Sirius finally congratulated him, it was as though the entire meltdown had never happened. It still stung a bit, seeing James go off on practices without him, but Remus had given Sirius a lot to think about. He didn't want to push his friends away, or let his own emotional turmoil spill over into other people. A victory for one marauder was a victory for them all, and by the time his 13th birthday rolled around, Sirius was determined to enter his teenage years with a more mature outlook. The day kicked off with a rowdy round of happy birthday at breakfast, which by this point had become tradition for the marauders. The Potter's owl flew in and dropped off a huge basket of chocolates from Fleamont and Euphemia, and James had ordered half of the Zonko's catalogue as a birthday present. Even more exciting was Remus's gift, a shyly passed over small stack of Muggle magazines, Melody Maker and NME. They were full of articles about Muggle music, artists that Sirius had never heard of before, and one even had an interview with Mark Bolan. They spent most of breakfast flipping through the pages, laughing at the unmoving pictures, and admiring the strange and gaudy outfits that the rock stars wore. Sirius was in high spirits by the time they finished their meal, grinning as they made their way out to their first lesson. But it wasn't to last. As they went to leave the great hall, they found their way blocked. "Sirius?" a familiar voice said. The last time Sirius had spoken to his cousin was during her sister's wedding in the summer. At 15, Narcissa still had a good 6 inches on him, and she looked down her nose at his friends with disgust. She dyed and straightened her hair, one long and platinum sheet, which still threw him off every time he saw her. It wasn't, very black of her, trying to stand out like that. Even worse, Reggie was skulking at her side, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He'd started hanging out with Snape and that Crouch kid, which infuriated Sirius to no end. He'd tried to talk to his brother about it a few times, but their conversations now always seemed to end with one of them yelling at the other. Eventually they'd just stopped speaking. "Sissy." "Sissy?" Sirius nodded briskly, refusing to acknowledge Reg. His cousin flinched at the nickname. "It's your birthday," she said, in the same tone of voice that someone might say, "It's time to muck out the owlery," or "It's flobber worm dissection day." "Yes, I was aware." She rolled her eyes, but didn't snap at him the way Bellatrix would have. Narcissa had always been less intense than her sister. "You're to eat with us this evening. Come and sit at the Gryffindor table if you absolutely have to." "No," she narrowed her grey eyes. "Your mother has given us strict instructions. We'll eat privately, in the Slytherin common room, just like last year." "No," Sirius insisted, frustrated. "I want to eat with my friends." His parents weren't here. Narcissa could just lie and say they'd eaten together, if she really wanted to. He hated the way his family kept trying to push him around. "You can eat with them whenever you want," his cousin said sharply, raising her voice a bit. "Birthdays are family occasions." Sirius looked over at his brother. Regulus was staring at his feet, brow furrowed. He looked nervous about something. Irritation prickled over Sirius's skin. But ultimately he knew that Narcissa would make his life very nasty if he didn't agree to do what she said. Turning back to his cousin, he nodded. James reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder, sensing his frustration. And at that gesture, Reggie's head snapped up. He stared at the hand on his brother's shoulder like it had personally offended him, like Sirius was doing something wrong or hurtful by having other friends, which was unfair, because it wasn't as if Regulus was trying to do anything to help. He hadn't even said happy birthday. After setting a time for dinner, Narcissa flounced away, as usual. Regulus trailed after her, and Sirius watched them go. James turned to him. "Bad luck," he said sympathetically. "Want to bunk off lessons?" Sirius considered it, then shook his head. "Nah, I'll just take a few dung bongs with me to the dinner. We can see if that time bomb spell works." "Perfect." Sirius couldn't decide which was worse, Bellatrix's steady stream of insults or his brother's painfully awkward silence. After a few minutes at the table in the Slytherin common room, with no sound other than forks scraping their plates, Sirius was leaning towards the latter. Narcissa didn't make much of an effort to speak either, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. There was something odd about the quiet. She and Regulus kept exchanging glances, like they knew something that Sirius didn't. He stubbornly ignored them, scarfing down his dinner as quickly as he could, so that he could leave. By the time he was done, Regulus had halved the plate to finish, and Narcissa had barely touched her food at all. "Well," Sirius started to stand, breaking the painful silence. "This really has been lovely. Truly delightful conversation. Thank you. But you two seem very busy trying to develop some sort of telepathic communication, and I'd hate to interrupt that. So—" "Wait!" Narcissa grabbed his arm, keeping him at the table. He shook her off, annoyed. "What?" "Sit back down," she hissed. When he hesitated, she relaxed with an exasperated breath. "Just sit down, Sirius. There's something we need to discuss." "Fine," he muttered, rolling his eyes. "What is it?" She was staring down at her plate, lips pressed in a thin line. When she glanced over at Reggie, his brother also refused to meet his eyes. Sirius began to feel nervous. Had something happened with Andromeda? Had one of their great aunts died? Your parents are concerned. Narcissa finally spoke, and Sirius settled for the lecture. You've been blatantly disrespectful of our family and our traditions, and your behaviour reflects poorly on all of us." She sounded as if she were reciting from a script. "Yes, I know," Sirius interrupted. "I'm bringing ruin to the entire family. I'm going to destroy the noble name with my blood-traitor friends. I'm letting everyone down, blah, blah, blah." "This is Sirius!" Narcissa snapped. There was a fierce look in her eye that made Sirius sit up a bit straighter. She seemed furious, not just annoyed, but genuinely angry with him. "Your mother wrote to me to inform that they think they've been too lenient, that they need to guide you with a firmer hand. Our parents have spoken, and they say they've found a solution." Sirius frowned. He couldn't really see what his family could do, as long as he was at Hogwarts. It's not like they could stop him from playing pranks, and they couldn't force the school to let him switch houses. He got top marks, so they couldn't even complain there. He supposed they could try to prohibit him from seeing his friends on breaks, but he'd already been able to get around that mandate once. "We're getting married." Sirius waited, expecting a punchline. Silence. He looked at Reg, waiting for the joke, but his brother was staring at his feet and refusing to make eye contact. Sirius turned back to Narcissa. Her face was entirely serious, drawn with anger and exhaustion. "I'm sorry. What?" "Our parents have arranged the engagement. The betrothal ceremony is this summer, so you're to buck up your ideas by then." Her voice was completely devoid of any emotion as she said, "We'll have the wedding as soon as you graduate." It didn't make any sense. He was 13. The Blacks married young, sure, but not before they were of age. And Narcissa! "But we're cousins," he said numbly. She laughed, dry and humourless. "Hasn't stopped our family before." "No! That's disgusting! I'm not marrying you!" Something snapped behind Narcissa's eyes, and she flashed with rage. "You think I want to marry you? This is all your fault, you stupid little prat," she hissed. "You just had to be the centre of attention, playing rebel with your little friends. You and Andromeda, you're just as bad as each other, getting herself knocked up by a bloody muggle, and now you've gone and dragged me into it. When I already have loose—" Her voice broke off abruptly, and Sirius was shocked to see tears in her eyes. She shoved away from the table, throwing one last murderous glare. "Happy birthday, Sirius." Narcissa strode off to her room without another word. He watched her go, curtain of pale hair swaying behind her. In the silence left behind, he turned to Reg. "Suppose you knew about this, then?" His brother shook his head helplessly. "Narcissa showed me the letter, but I—" "Right. Yeah. Great." Sirius stood, too, shaking his head in disgust. "Some brother you are." He left before Regulus had a chance to respond. He made his way back to the Gryffindor Tower, Narcissa's words ringing in his head. "This is all your fault, you stupid little prat." It couldn't be real, could it? Marriage. Of all things, his parents expected that to fix him. Sirius felt numb, trying to imagine himself placing a ring onto his cousin's finger, the way Rodolphus Lestrange had at Bellatrix's betrothal ceremony. He shuddered. Peter and James found him like that, stricken and wandering the dungeons. He'd ended up going the opposite direction that he was supposed to. He hadn't even noticed, just kept walking. They ushered him under the invisibility cloak with them, and Sirius was too numb to even ask why they bought it. There was still plenty of time before curfew. James kept asking what had happened, but Sirius couldn't bring himself to speak the words out loud. "I'm getting married." "They're insane," he mumbled distantly. "My family's insane. It's horrendous. My mother's gone crazy. She's officially lost her mind. Disgusting. Appalling." He was still distracted when they returned to their room, remembering how Narcissa's face had twisted up as she snapped at him. And Andromeda, she was pregnant? When had that happened? Remus sat up, shooting James a concerned look. "What's up?" "It's terrible," Sirius said. "Really, Really terrible. Vile. The worst, most unspeakable, horrific. He collapsed face down on his bed. He's been like this since we found him in the dungeons, James explained. Nothing but adjectives. Superlative adjectives, Sirius corrected, speaking into his pillow. Yeah, you're so dramatic. James sighed from somewhere behind him. Want to tell us why? Sirius rolled onto his back, staring up at the canopy of his bed. Just say it, he thought. Just tell them. You'll have to tell them eventually. I'm getting married. The words sounded all wrong, sour on his tongue, heavy where they fell into the quiet room. What? All three of his friends spoke up simultaneously, shock evident in their voices. Sirius couldn't bring himself to look at them. It was easier to speak when he couldn't see their faces. Narcissa told me. He kept his voice flat, emotionless. Usually they wouldn't make a match until I was of age, like with Bellatrix. But they say they've decided to tighten the reins in my case. Make a match? James sounded flabbergasted. The Blacks still don't have arranged marriages, surely. Of course we do, Sirius sighed, numb. Noble and most ancient, etc., etc. They want to hold the betrothal ceremony next summer. I'm supposed to buck up my ideas in time for it. Then the wedding is happening as soon as I finished Hogwarts. Doubt you lot will be invited. That's mad. That's medieval. That's my mother, Sirius supplied glumly. Remus spoke up curiously. Who are you supposed to be marrying? Sirius sat up. That's the twist in the dragon's tail, isn't it, Lupin? He said bitterly, anger bleeding back into his voice. That's my mother's piece de la résistance. Who? Sissy. What? Narcissa, your cousin. Narcissa Black. Sirius nodded. His friends' faces displayed a mix of outrage and shock and disgust, and suddenly he felt very tired. He lay back down onto his bed. Apparently they're looking to rein her in too. Andromeda, her sister, the normal one. She's pregnant, according to Sissy. They're closing ranks, trying to prevent any more dirty blood from getting in. But there have to be other pureblood girls out there, James reasoned. And I thought she and that Malfoy creep were getting out. But there have to be other pureblood girls out there, James reasoned. And I thought she and that Malfoy creep were going out. They are, Sirius said, remembering his cousin's watery eyes. She's as pissed off about it as I am, believe me. Talk about wedded bliss. What about Regulus? James asked. Sirius frowned. What about him? He said sourly. Think he fancies her instead? Before James could respond, Peter piped up. She's quite pretty. Sirius glared at him with all the venom he could muster. She's my cousin, you dolt. All right, James said sternly, holding his hand up as if he could sense his friend's dangerous mood. No need for name-calling. We're just trying to help. Sirius bit his tongue as James continued. I meant, did Regulus say anything? He was there, wasn't he? Not a word, Sirius growled. His friends seemed to think better of mentioning his brother again after that. All right. Well, James pushed his glasses up his nose. We've got until next summer, and we've got Narcissa on our side, believe it or not. So I'd say it's not hopeless. But Sirius wasn't in the mood for Potter's blind optimism. You don't know what hopelessness is until you've met my mother, he muttered back, voice dark. And she doesn't know what a marauder is, James retorted, undeterred. Gentlemen, he clasped his hands together decisively, we have a new mission.